and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you're watching this channel, then you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, which is a cozy corner of the internet, where we discuss narrative. We just basically enjoy it. And what we're doing tonight is we're going to enjoy old narratives in the form of old folklore, specifically old Scottish folklore, which I'll say very little on, but a little bit on in a minute. But if you are watching this live, just so you know, there is a live chat there, and I see that Jumpstore, Tammy, GS, Lizzie Rose are already in it, and there'll probably be a few more that drop by. If you want to join in the conversation, discuss a bit the stories that we're reading and so on, that is the place to do it. But if you're watching this later and you're not watching it live, worry not. You have your own advantage. Your advantage is you can go down to the description below and skip over this to the beginning of the story. There will be timestamps down there that tell you when the story starts. We're only reading one story tonight because it is quite warm. And in the summer, two things. Viewership is a little lower because people are out at the beach. But also, it's very warm and I can't have my air conditioning on while I do this, so I can't do really long streams because I have blood that was made for the frozen northern sea. As I've discussed before, I'm hot in the winter kind of person. That's what we're doing tonight. If that interests you, stick around. If you want to hear some old folklore read live, then you're in the right place. If you don't, thanks for giving us a chance anyways. How did I get onto this? Just a second. There we go. Just going to say hello to the chat, say a very brief little bit about this story, and get right to the story. Yeah, that's a good point, Jumpstore. It has not been tested in the summer, and it labors over everything. Jumpstore is mentioning my crappy old laptop. Those who've been watching the channel for at least about 8 or 9 months know that my nice laptop cooked itself around November, and I had to switch back to a now 12-year-old laptop, which has been getting along okay, but it's always right at, like, the fans are going and everything, so I don't know how it's going to handle the heat. Tammy says it's hot where she is as well. Yeah, I hope that you have AC. I do have AC, but obviously I already mentioned I can't run it during the stream. Her shoulder is still sore, but she's surviving. She's had an injury in her shoulder. I think that's about all the chatting we were doing. Okay, so let's talk very briefly about tonight's story. I don't have as much to say tonight as I normally do, because it mostly was chosen just because it's a good story and I liked it. Imagine that. I'm not saying that the other stories I choose aren't good stories or that I don't like them. I can't think of any story I've read that I didn't like. I just don't read it. But usually I have some sort of theme or idea that I tie it around, but not everything fits that. And what this one is, it's called the Elfin Knight. It's a Scottish tale about a basically haunted moor. Although haunted usually carries the implication of like undead spirits, it's not that kind of haunted. There's an elf on it. It follows some pretty standard elf tropes. If you've watched this show before and you've seen the title on the thumbnail, then you pretty much know a lot of what's coming. But it has a bit of an interesting twist in that it has a sort of hero element to it as well, not just being suckered in. So I really enjoyed the story. I've enjoyed a lot of these stories from what's called the Scottish Fairy Book, which is a book by Elizabeth W. Grierson, who there's not a lot of information about, to be honest. I do try to look up some of these folklorists before the stream so I can give them their due. Not much I could find about her, other than she was a collector of folklore. And I did some other things for Scotland, basically, like books, guides, things like that. She lived around the turn of the century. This book comes from about 1910, I believe it was published. And you can get it for free on a Project Gutenberg if you want to read the entire Scottish Fairy Book yourself. If you don't want to read it yourself, I've read several things from this, book that you can find scattered across my Fireside Fairytales playlist. Yeah, that's about all I have to say. This is a pretty standard elf story with a bit of a twist, and I liked it just because it was well told. So since we're all hot and would like to get back to our cool air conditioning, I will tell us our story and be out lickety-split. It is a moor in Scotland, so it has to be raining. Maybe that'll help cool us. Our story tonight comes to us from the Scottish Fairy Book by Elizabeth W. Grierson, and it is called The Elfin Knight. There is a lone moor in Scotland, which in times past was said to be haunted by an elfin knight. This knight was only seen at rare intervals, once in every 7 years or so. But the fear of him lay on all the country road, for every now and then someone would set out to cross the moor and would never be heard of again. And although men might search every inch of its ground, no trace of that lost man would be found. And with a thrill of horror, the searching party would go home again, shaking their heads and whispering to one another that he had fallen into the hands of the dreaded knight. So, as a rule, this moor was deserted, for nobody dared pass that way, much less live there, and by it became the haunt of all sorts of wild animals, which made their lairs there. And as they found that they never were disturbed by mortal huntsmen, anyways. Now in that same region lived 2 young earls, Earl St. Clair and Earl Gregory, who were such friends that they rode and hunted and fought together if need be. And as they were both very fond of the chase, Earl Gregory suggested one day that they should go a-hunting on the haunted moor, in spite of the Elfin King. "Certes, I hardly believe in him at all," cried the young man with a laugh. "Methinks 'tis but an old wife's tale to frighten the bairns withal, lest they go staying amongst the heather and lose themselves. And 'tis pity that such fine sport should be lost because we 2 bearded men pay heed to such gossip." But Earl St. Clair looked grave. "'Tis ill meddling with unchancy things," he answered. "'Tis no bairn's tale that travellers have set out across that moor, who have vanished bodily, and never more been heard of. But it is, as thou sayest, a pity that so much good sport be lost, all because an elfin knight choosest to claim the land as his, and make us mortals pay toll for the privilege of planting a foot upon it. I've heard tell, however, that one is safe from any power that the knight may have if one wears the sign of the Blessed Trinity. So let us bind that on our arm, and ride forth without fear." Sir Gregory burst into a loud laugh at these words. "Dost thou think that I'm one of the bairns," he said, "first to be frightened by an idle tale, and then to think that a leaf or clover will protect me? No. Carry that sign if thou wilt. I'll trust to my good bow and arrow." But Earl St. Clair did not heed his companion's word, for he remembered how his mother had told him when he was a little lad at her knee that whoso carried the sign of the Blessed Trinity need never fear any spell that might be thrown over him by warlock, witch, elf, or demon. So he went out to the meadow and plucked a leaf of clover. And I'm going to pause briefly here because I think at least some of my audience probably is not aware of this. I am. It was a thing that I was told as a child, but the clover, traditionally three-leaved, of course. You know, the four-leaf clover is the lucky clover, but often three-leaved, was often seen as a sign of the Trinity of Christianity. You know, depending on what tradition you're from, but the one I knew was God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Jesus, three in one. So he went out into the meadow and plucked a leaf of clover, which he bound on his arm with a silken scarf. Then he mounted his horse and rode with Earl Gregory to the desolate and lonely moorland. For some hours all went well, and in the heat of the chase the young men forgot their fears. Then suddenly both of them reined in their steeds and sat gazing in front of them with affrighted faces. For a horseman had crossed their track, and they both would fain have known who he was whence he came. Aye, my troth, but he rideth in haste, whoever he may be, said Earl Gregory at last. And so I always thought that no steed on earth could match mine for swiftness. I reckon that for every league that mine goeth, his would go 7. Let us follow him, and see from what part of the world he cometh. Lord forbid that thou shouldst stir thy horse's feet to follow him, said Earl St. Clair devoutly. Why, man, 'tis the Elfin Knight. Canst thou see that he doth not ride on solid ground, but fly through the air? And that although he rideth on what seemeth a mortal steed, he's rarely carried by mighty pinions, which cleave the air like those of a bird. Follow him, forsooth! It'll be an evil day for thee when thou seekest to do that. But Earl St. Clair forgot that he carried a talisman which his companion lacked, that enabled him to see things as they really were. And while the other's eyes were holden, and he was startled and amazed when Earl Gregory said sharply, Thy mind hath gone mad over this, when Earl Gregory, this elfin king. I tell thee, he who passed us was a goodly knight, clad in a green vestiture, and riding on a great black jennet. And because I love a gallant horseman, and would fain to learn his name and degree, I'll follow him till I find him, even if it be at the world's end. And without another word, he put spurs to his horse and galloped off. Following the direction which the mysterious stranger had taken, leaving Earl St. Clair alone upon the moorland, his fingers touching the sacred sign and his trembling lips muttering prayers for protection. For he knew that his friend had been bewitched, and he made up his mind, brave gentleman that he was, that he would follow him to the world's end, if need be, and try to deliver his brother from the spell that had been cast over him. Meanwhile, Earl Gregory rode on, ever following in the wake of the knight in green over moor and burn and moss, till he came to the most desolate region that he'd ever been in his life, where the wind blew cold as if from snowfields, where the hoarfrost lay thick and white on the withered grass at his feet. And there in front of him was a sight from which mortal man might well shrink back in awe and dread, for he saw an enormous ring marked out on the ground, inside of which the grass, instead of being withered and frozen like those outside it, was lush and rank and green, where hundreds of shadowy elfin figures were dancing, clad in loose transparent robes of dull blue, which seemed to curl and twist round their wearers like snaking wreaths of smoke. These weird goblins were shouting and singing as they danced and waved their arms above their heads and throwing themselves about on the ground, for all the world as if they had gone mad. And when they saw Earl Gregory halt on his horse just outside the ring, they beckoned him with their skinny fingers. And strange as it may seem, the spell that had been cast over the young Earl was so powerful, and in spite of his fear, he felt that he must obey this eldritch summons. And he threw his bridle on his horse's neck and prepared to join them in the circle. But just then, an old and grizzled goblin stepped out from among his companions and approached him. Apparently, he dare not leave the charmed circle, for he stopped at the edge of it and then, stooping down, pretended to pick up something. But he whispered to the knight in a hoarse whisper,
"I know not whom thou art, not from whence thou camest, Sir Knight. But if thou lovest thy life, see to it that thou comest not within this ring, nor join us within our feast, else wilt thou be forever undone."
But Earl Gregory only laughed. "I vowed that I would follow the Green Knight," he replied, "and I will carry out my vow, even if the venture leadeth me close to the nethermost world." And with these words, he stepped over the edge of that circle, right in among the ghostly dancers. At his coming, they shouted louder than ever, and danced more madly and sang more lustily. And then all at once a silence fell upon them, and they parted into two companies, leaving a way through their midst, up which they signed to the Earl to pass. And so he walked through their ranks till he came to the middle of the circle. And there, seated at a table of red marble, was the knight whom he had come so far to seek, clad in his grass-green robes, and before him on the table stood a wondrous goblet, fashioned from an emerald, and set round the rim with blood-red rubies. And this cup was filled with heather ale, which foamed up over the brim. And when the knight saw Sir Gregory, he lifted it from the table and handed it to him with a stately bow. And Sir Gregory, being very thirsty, drank. And as he drank, he noticed that the ale in the goblet never grew less, but ever foamed up to the edge, and for the first time his heart misgave him, and he wished that he had never set out on this strange adventure. But alas, the time for regrets had passed, for already a strange numbness was stealing over his limbs, and a chill pallor was creeping over his face, and before he could utter a single cry for the help, the goblet dropped from his nerveless fingers, and he fell down before the Elfin King like a dead man. Then a great shout of triumph went up from the company. But soon their shouts of triumph began to die away, and they muttered and whispered to each other with looks of something like fear on their faces. For their keen ears heard a sound which filled their hearts with dread. Can you hear it? Maybe to you it's just a horse, but to them it was the sound of human footsteps, which were so free and untrammeled that they knew at once that the stranger, whoever he be, was as yet untouched by any charm of the Elfin Knight. And if this were so, he might work them ill and rescue their captive from him. And what they dreaded was true, for it was the brave Earl St. Clair who approached, fearless and strong, because of the holy sign he bore. And as soon as he saw the charmed ring and the eldritch dancers, he was about to step over its magic border when the little grizzled goblin who had whispered to Earl Gregory came and whispered to him also. "Alas, alas," he exclaimed with a look of sorrow on his wrinkled face. "Hast thou come, as thy companion came, to pay thy toll of years, Elfin King? Oh, if thou hast wife or child behind thee, I beseech thee by all that thou holdest sacred, turn back here, it be too late." "Who art thou? From whence hast thou come?" asked the Earl, looking kindly down at the little creature in front of him. "I came from the country that thou hast come from," wailed the goblin. "For I was once a mortal man, even as thou, but I set out over the enchanted moor. The Elfin King appeared in the guise of a beauteous knight. He looked so brave, so noble and generous that I followed him hither and drank of his heather ale, and now I'm doomed to bide here till 7 years long be spent." "As for thy friend, Sir Earl, he too hath drunk of the accursed draught, and he now lieth as dead at our lawful monarch's feet. He will wake up, 'tis true, but it will be in such guise as I wear, and to the bondage with which I am bound." "Is there naught that I can do to rescue him?" cried Earl St. Clair eagerly. "Ere he taketh on him the elfin shape, I have no fear of the spell of his cruel crafter, for I bear the sign of the one who is stronger than he. Speak speedily, little man, for time presseth." "There is something that thou couldst do, Sir Earl," whispered the goblin. "But to essay it were a desperate attempt. For if thou failest, then could not even the power of the blessed sign save thee. No, no." "And what is that?" asked the Earl impatiently. "Thou must remain motionless," answered the old man, "in the cold and frost till dawn break, and the hour cometh when they sing matins in the holy church. Then must thou walk slowly 9 times round the edge of the enchanted circle, and after that thou must walk boldly across it to the red marble table where sits the Elfin King. On it thou wilt see an emerald goblet, studded with rubies and filled with heather ale, that thou must secure and carry away. But whilst thou art doing so, let no word cross thy lips, for this enchanted ground whereon we dance may look solid to mortal eyes, but in reality it is not so. 'Tis but a quaking bog, and under it is a great lake, wherein dwelleth a fearsome monster.
And if thou so much as utter a word while thy foot resteth upon it, thou wilt fall through the bog and perish in the waters beneath.
And that's the picture on the thumbnail. So saying, the grisly goblin stepped back among his companions, leaving Earl St. Clair standing alone on the outskirts of the charmed ring. There he waited, shivering with cold, through the long, dark hours, till the gray dawn began to break over the hilltops. And with its coming, the elfin forms before him seemed to dwindle, fade away. And at the hour when the sound of the matin bell came softly pealing from across the moor, can you hear it? Round and round the ring he paced, keeping steadily on his way, although loud murmurs of anger like distant thunder rose from the elven shades. And even the very ground seemed to heave and quiver as if it would shake this bold intruder from its surface. But through the power of the blessed sign on his arm, Earl St. Clair went on unhurt, circling and circling. And when he had finished pacing around the ring, he stepped boldly onto the enchanted ground and walked across it. And what was his astonishment to find that all the ghostly elves and goblins whom he'd seen were lying frozen into tiny blocks of ice, so that he was sore put to it to walk amongst them without treading upon them. And as he approached the marble tail, the very hairs rose on his neck and head at the sight of the Elfin King sitting behind it, stiff and stark like his followers, while in front of him lay the form of his friend, Earl Gregory, who had shared the same fate. Nothing stirred save two coal-black ravens who sat one on each side of the table, as if to guard the emerald goblet, flapping their wings and croaking hoarsely. You're not going to tell me that's not a reference to Odin. When Earl St. Clair lifted the precious cup, they rose in the air and circled around his head, screaming with rage, rah, 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 threatening to dash it from his hands with their claws, while the frozen elves, even their mighty king himself, stirred in their sleep and half sat up, as if to lay hands on this presumptuous intruder, but the power of the holy sign restrained them. Else had Earl St. Clair been foiled in his quest. As he retraced his steps, awesome and terrible were the sounds that he heard around him. The ravens shrieked, "Quack, quack," and the frozen goblins screamed, "Wow!" And up from the hidden lake below came the sound of the deep breathing of the awful monster that was lurking there, eager for prey. But the brave Earl heeded none of these things, kept steadily onwards, trusting in the might of the sign he bore, and it carried him safely through all these dangers. And just as the sound of the matin bell was dying away, in the morning air, he stepped onto solid ground once more and flung the enchanted goblet from him. And lo, every one of the frozen elves vanished, along with their king and his marble tail, and nothing was left on the rank green grass save Earl Gregory, who slowly woke from his enchanted slumber and stretched himself and woke up shaking in every limb. He gazed vaguely around him as if he scarce remembered where he was. And when, after Earl St. Clair had run to him and had held him in his arms till his senses returned, and the warm blood coursed through his veins, and the two friends returned to the spot where Earl St. Clair had thrown down the wondrous goblet, they found nothing but a piece of rough gray whinstone, with a drop of dew hidden in a little crevice, which was hollowed on its side. And that's the story of the Elfin Knight of the Scottish moorland. Like I said, it's a shorter one today. I couldn't really find much that I felt paired well with this story to begin with, so some stories are like that. I see Janara's here. Hello, Janara. Thank you for dropping by. It's always good to see you. We're talking about our height and horses, I see. I know very little about horses. To me, they're big, goofy dogs. Every experience I've had with them, people are like, look at the majesty of horses. And I'm like, this reminds me of my goofy dog. There's some love for this picture. I don't know what this picture is connected to, by the way. It's obviously got nothing to do with the story we just read. And the next story is like a poem that has absolutely nothing to do with a little mouse and pixie. But it's lovely. Tammy says, good story tonight. Hope everyone has a great night. I hope you eventually find a lot of peace and comfort, Tammy. I know you've had a rough time. But, you know, thank you for letting us be there with you. Zombie Wolf says, random trivia. Gladiators did not usually fight to the death, as they were like an older form of WWE wrestlers. Popular opinion could sour quickly if gladiators were forced to fight to the death. Well, the heroes didn't fight to the death, as I understand it, but there were ones that were sent in there basically to die. But they weren't really like gladiators per se. They were like prisoners. Well, I guess gladiators kind of were. But my knowledge of Roman history is spotty at best, so I may be wrong about that. Well, I know that a lot of people feel like this show is too short, and here I am doing an even shorter one. And I apologize for that. But yeah, I'm sure I'll make up for it. At some point, I'll have an enormous amount of stories that around a topic that I want to do. I've noticed that Jürgen Hubert is doing a lot of story little packets and translations in his newest editions on Sunken Castles Evil Poodles that I'm interested in doing. I'm just trying to pick the right time for it. He's doing Uncanny Horses this month, which is something that I find interesting. But yeah. Anyhow, it's already getting hot in here, and I make the same joke every year, and I'm never going to not make it. And that is a joke that no one laughs at, which is in the summer, you unlock the shiny Rory, which is a reference for the older folk and maybe even the younger folk in the crowd to Pokemon. Which I don't even know if that's my crowd. But yeah, if you're looking to collect some rare Rorys, summer is where the shiny Rory is unlocked. Zombie Wolf says, it's amazing how advanced ancient civilizations could be. I did want to mention that I think the best, I can't remember who it was. It was some philosopher of history that I read. But he said, think not of history as like a line up where we're at the peak of history, but rather waves of creation and destruction. And I found that much more helpful. Like, fairly advanced societies predate us, but so much about them is lost in their destruction. But I'm no great historian. Janera says, don't know how I feel about being called old because of Pokemon, lol. Um, um, I don't know. I mean, I have a young niece who does seem to like Pokemon, so I guess it's still got a lot of cachet. Apparently, it's a bigger brand than Disney, which is wild to me because it really doesn't do that many things, right? Like Disney's all over the place, but apparently they bring in as a brand. I forget what the caveat was, what exactly the framing was, but as a brand, they like are worth more. They're the number one brand in the world, Pokemon, in terms of value. Say rare Rory's 3 times fast. Rare Rory, rare Rory, rare Rory. I'll tell you what. I'll leave you with a short anecdote about my name, Rory. For those who don't know, my name is a Celtic name, basically, a Gaelic Celtic name. It's, I guess, is most associated with Ireland. Though, as I've mentioned, don't have a lot of Irish blood. I have a lot of Scottish blood. But it means Red King, who I don't know what this means, but apparently is the last king of Ireland. Whether that's always what it was a reference to, I don't know. The Gaelic spelling of it is wild. It's like Ruahridit or something like that. Wild to our eye, anyways. It's just a language. But it uses what I think is called the rhotic R. I think that's what you call that R. Someone will correct me in the chat if I'm wrong about that. Anyways, it's a rare R. Rory is not a common... That R is not a common R in other languages. And so the consequence of that is that when I encounter people who speak English as a second language and they're coming from a language that doesn't use a lot of those sort of rhotic R's, my name is a nightmare. Like, for them to pronounce. They feel really bad. They can't get it right. I remember at one point I was signing into an event. Obvious reasons I won't say what, but it was like an official event, like a convention, but not for fun, like a business convention thing. And they were filling out a name tag. And the person who was taking my name was a person who was English as a second language. And it was one of the languages that had who interprets an R with a bit more of an, I guess, English L kind of sound to it. And I told her my name several times. She was struggling to get it. And then I gave her my ID too to show her my name. And she put on my name tag Lolly. Lolly. Which amongst my friends remains one of our favorite inside jokes at Rory's expense. Anyhow, my name is infamously hard to pronounce for a lot of language groups. Zombie Wolf says you're looking for the overlooking the entire population of Japan. Not really. Like I said, I live in a Japanese household. It definitely is multi-generational here, but it's still, I don't know how much reach it has with people still, because I don't talk to young people much. I mean, I don't talk to people much. So I just wanted to leave that open in case people were like, I don't know that much. It's not that I don't think people know Pokemon. I think everyone knows Pokemon at this point. I just don't know if people know Pokemon. Everyone knows Pokemon well enough to know what shiny is a reference to. That's all I mean. All right. Well, that's enough of me babbling. Thank you, everybody, for giving the stream a shot, if this is the first time you were watching. If you like the story, do consider giving a like. I don't normally ask for it, but there was a couple of streams there where people seem to forget. Or maybe they didn't like it. I don't know. I will be back on Thursday with some sort of writing game. And for those of you who were there on the last Thursday, 2 things I'd like to add. First of all, Trove's Kickstarter did get funded, so congrats to Sleepy Sasquatch Games. And then the second thing, which I'll say more about probably on Thursday, is I spent a good deal of the weekend, all day Saturday basically, writing out our trove that we started together. And now I kind of have 3 variations of the dungeon and 4 new mechanics. which might just be a hat on a hat. I don't actually know if it's any good at this point, but I'm going to finish it. I'm going to put it on my itch.io. People are welcome to play test it and tell me if there are problems with the design. Gennaro says, we'll try to make it Thursday. Of course, as you're able. This is a place to feel relaxed, not obligated. Anyhow, Zombie Wolf, Jum's Store, Lizzie Rose, GS, Genera, and Tammy. I don't think I'm missing anybody else. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining in the chat and listening to the story of the two gentlemen saving each other from the Elfin Knight, who seems to be Odin. That's my interpretation. And I'll see you again very soon. I'll keep the fire going, although you don't need it right now. Have a good sleep.